So hello and welcome back to Climbing Mount Sophia. I'm happy today to be back with my two good friends, David Schindler and John Vervaeke. We're going to be following up on a conversation that we had on John's channel. And
Yes.
John, take it away.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here again. I always consider it a great privilege. I was telling David while we were off camera that I just taught an online course for Johannes Niederhauser's Halkian Academy, Beyond Nihilism, and the final book, we did 4 books, and the final book we ended up on was his Love in the Postmodern Predicament. So David is very present in my mind that right now. I gave a talk at Stoicon on the beauty with all of the beauty that's implicit in Stoicism, and I cited David's thinking and some of his arguments. So it's a great pleasure to be here again with you, David. And Ken, you know that you always bring a certain wonderful tenderness and affection to my heart, and I welcome that. I'm liking the fact that you and I are friends and not just interlocutors, and we're trying to maintain a long-distance friendship, which is challenging, but I appreciate it. So first of all, I just wanted to set the context of being here. I wanted to maybe give David a chance if he wanted to just say hello to everybody. And
yeah, no, thank you. Once again, it really is a great privilege. I very much look forward to these conversations. I always walk away having learned something, and that's the sign of a good friendship and a good dialogue is new things pop up. That's, I think, the heart of the matter. So I'm very much looking forward to this, and thanks again to Ken for setting all this up.
So I'm going to take the daunting task of trying to frame what we're going to talk about today, given what we ended on last time and promised to talk about. We promised to talk about one of the things that whenever you seem to talk about it, you fall into heresy or confusion, which is the Trinity. And then relate that to Hegel's notion of reason and intelligibility. And I proposed off camera a framing to Ken and David, and they both liked it. And I'll try and set it up as basic as I can. I'm going to try my best, and I hope we all will, to try and keep this as grounded as possible. This is a topic in which it's not possible to talk about it without doing some abstract thought. I apologize for that, because sometimes people, I can't, yeah, I get it. And hopefully we can ping in and out in certain ways. Yeah. So the person that I want to give a lot of credit to for the framing I'm going to make use of is James Filler, who's a thinker. I've just come across his very recent book, which I would put in my top 10 books of all time, up there with Religion and Nothingness, up with David's Plato's Critique of Pure Reason, is Heidegger, Neoplatonism and the History of Being. And the subtitle is very important for our discussion: Relation as Ontological Ground. For those of you who don't want to read an entire book, and it's not cheap either, right? There's an online paper, also recent, 2019, Relationality as the Ground of Being, the One as Pure Relation in Heidegger. So Relationality as the Ground of Being, the One as Pure Relation in Heidegger. There's some other books, and I'm not claiming to have read this third book, but it seems to be convergent with this, and then I'm about to read called Mind, Value, and Cosmos, on the relational nature of ultimacy. I'm trying to point that there's an emerging, I don't want to say zeitgeist, but there's a lot of different people who are converging on this consideration. So what is the consideration? Now, here's where it could get abstract, and I'll try my best. First of all, I'll just outlay the point, and as needed, I'll go into some of the arguments, but I'll just do the framing first. And then, I want David's initial response and Ken's initial response. And then as needed, I can tap into any of the arguments that Filler makes. I'll have to pun here to fill things in. Okay, so, so the argument is this. The argument is, it takes as a presupposition that there really are relations, and well, we can get into that because of problems with nominalism and problems around intelligibility and etc. And so it then asks the question, well, what's the relationship between relations and relata? And Filler is arguing that what Plotinus and the Neoplatonists are arguing is that relationality is actually ultimate, and the relata emerge out of the relationality rather than how we typically think, prototypically in nominalism, which is there are the things that independently exist, and either the relations emerge between them ontologically, or where they are given to them by our mind, nominalism. And Filler goes through why that's both of those are extremely problematic. And then he pushes towards that relation can't be a property of either one of the relata. It can't be something we just assign, etc. Like I said, I'll go into the detailed arguments as needed. And then what he then argues is, okay, you take that basic notion and then you take it into some really almost operatic points in Plato, in the Sophist and the Parmenides, where he's wrestling with the problem of the one and the many. And Plato actually comes to the conclusion explicitly that being is somehow both one and many. And of course, he tries to reconcile that by integrating Heraclitus and Parmenides, but whether or not that solution is right was something we can talk about. But he says one and many, and then Filler plays with that and says, okay, and you've got determination and intelligibility, and you seem to also get to that the way to understand how it can be one and many is that relationality is the ultimate ground of being. Now, this has some great advantages to it. First of all, if you're a Christian, and both of you are, so I'm not just speaking to the wind. This has an advantage, and it's fair for me to do this because we're talking about a fundamentally Christian notion, the Trinity. So I don't think I'm just smuggling something in here. What Filler argues is that Christianity is actually arguing that relationality is the nature of ultimacy, and that the Trinity properly understood that. All the terms in the Trinity are inherently relational terms. The relations have to be essential to the persons. They have to be what you would call internal relations. If they're external relations, we get actually a multiple God, and all kinds of arguments like this. The notion of God as being inherently relational is very, I would say, orthodox in the sense that it goes with the identity statements made about God in the Bible. God is love, God is light. These are both inherently relational, where light is meant as that which, as the intelligibility between things. Logos is inherently relational. You better believe logos is inherently relational, right? So it would really help to explain the Trinity. And he goes through how some of the important church fathers, he touches on Augustine, but he does a lot with Pseudo-Dionysius, Maximus Erigena, and I would add in, you could add in Nicholas of Cusa with the coincidence of opposites, the inherent relationality of ultimacy, as Davis puts it, or Davies. No, I think it's Davis. It is Davis. Another advantage of this is it helps us to understand the transcendentals, which are taken to be the most proper relations of God, the true, the good, and the beautiful. These are all inherently relational. And to put an even stronger point on it, the classical Orthodox doctrine is that they are convertible, which means the relationship between them are internal relations, right? They all completely interpenetrate each other, but they're not reducible. So interpenetrating and not reducible, inherently relational. And it also helps to explain how intelligibility and information, which are inherently relational in nature, actually can be conforming to being, why they're somehow one but not logically identical. This wedding of intelligibility and being, the fundamental insight that goes back to Parmenides. Well, because they're both inherently relational and they are inherently in relation. And so that is powerful. And then finally, to pick up on Hegel, Hegel's sociality of rationality, which we talked a lot about last time, and we were bumping up against, but something underneath it or beyond it, or how does Plato and Hegel's dialectic go together? And I'm not sure if this is in Hegel or a problem for Hegel. I'm still reading the Brandom. I'm still reading I can't remember the author, Hegel's theory of intelligibility. Zambrusta or something like that. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I apologize for forgetting it. And here's the idea that the inherent sociality of rationality is actually grounded in the inherent relationality of being and intelligibility themselves. And in that sense, we can make sense of Hegel's sort of objective or absolute idealism and how it grounds rationality. So the framing I've just given you does a lot of important work, and it also helps to explain nominalism as a reaction to the Neoplatonic Christian tradition, because nominalism is an attempt to make independently existing things primarily again. And then, of course, Spinoza comes along and says, well, if you give me that notion of substance, right, what happens is there can only be one substance, because if you have more than one, you get, and then it turns out that saying there's one substance is pretty much equivalent to saying there's no substance, because all there is the relationalities, the inherent dynamic activity, relationality, the modes, the attributes, all that sort of stuff. The inherent relationality comes out. And then, of course, that can also be seen in Whitehead, who makes a very similar kind of argument in Process and Reality. So we can pick up on a current trend. We can run through Plato all the way through, and we can make sense of a lot of things. So you can see why I think this is a very amazing book, and I think it gives us a wonderful framing for exploring the Trinity. Like I said, I have tried not to go into too much detail or press too much on people's working memory capacity. We can go into individual arguments as needed. They have to do with things like why purely external relations don't make any sense. That determination requires relationality, information, intelligibility require relationality, etc. But I'll stop. So first of all, initial reactions, what do we want to do, what comes up for you, challenges, connections, so forth.
Go ahead, David.
And do you want to start? Yeah, no, John, that was really, really excellent. I mean, just superb how much you were able to articulate in such a brief span there. A couple of points that I would like to mention. As always, Plato sort of presents the problem in such a great way, and as you say, at the end of the Sophists, it's wonderful. He recognizes that God, that what is ultimate, has to be one, because multiplicity would seem to require something to. If multiplicity is intelligible at all, there has to be a unity behind it, and yet on the other hand. God has to be perfect, and Plato recognizes that things like intelligence and life are perfections and have to belong to God, but you can't have intelligence and life without multiplicity. And so he says, is God then ultimately multiple or ultimately one? And he says, you know what? It's beautiful. He says, I'm going to be like the little child who is presented with options and says, yes, I want both. And the stubborn child, and I mean, he doesn't attempt to resolve it, but he points to the need to affirm both somehow. And it has seemed to me that the Christian revelation of the Trinity, which is in a certain sense unanticipated, brings a remarkable clarity to all sorts of intellectual aporia and confusions and dilemmas and problems along the way. And at the heart of it, if you were to simply think about, the revelation of the Trinity has significant. I think it's really important to say it has not only philosophical significance, it also has theological significance, spiritual significance, and all of these need to be held together. But it does have an philosophical import. I think Hegel's problem is that he reduces the Trinity simply to its philosophical import. I think that's one way to articulate an issue in Hegel.
Let's put a pin in that, because I want to come back and
unpack. Yeah. Rather than recognizing the whole of the mystery and honoring the whole of the mystery, but but he was an absolute sort of pioneer in some ways, in seeing that it does have this mystery, does have philosophical import. And at the core of it, if I were asked to just try to articulate what I take to be essential, is that if we make this mystery a kind of a fundamental reference point that guides our thinking from the beginning. It's not something that we reason our way to, but it guides our thinking from the beginning. It prevents us from what I think is almost an inevitable problem, and you see traces of this everywhere, and that is a tendency to oppose unity and difference, even if you want ultimately to integrate them. Now, what do I mean by that? We tend to think that if something is relational, in order to emphasize the relationality of being, we somehow have to downplay the absoluteness of individuality or something like that. That these things, we have to compromise the integrity of individual things in order to affirm their relationality. So we say things are in relation, and that means we have to understand that things are sort of part of a bigger process. And the temptation is then to dissolve their integrity. And then you generate a reaction that says, no, we have to affirm that things are real in themselves and have their own integrity. And then we're led to downplay their relationality as something.
That's right.
Yeah. And what the Trinity says is that absolute individual identity is perfectly coincident with total and complete relationality.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
And I just don't think I don't know that you can reason to that, but when reason sees it, you say, well, I mean, it's to say that you can't reason to it doesn't mean that it's not intelligible. As soon as you see it, there's a kind of brilliant intelligibility, but it has a kind of surprising character to it. And then just reverberates all the way through. So I'll stop with that point and see if you want to.
No, I think that's great. I want to pick up on the Hegel thing in a sec.
Okay.
One thing occurred to me while you were talking about reasoning to it and reasoning from it.
Yeah.
And maybe this is something also we want to explore. For me, getting this helped me get clearer about what I think what I argue I see happening in the history of Neoplatonism, which is an increasing moving towards a complete top-down, bottom-up interpenetrability of emanation and emergence, where it seems fairly static and structured, almost poles in Plotinus. By the time you're getting to Erigena, for example, the polarity, right, the relationality, and if emergence is moving towards oneness, and emanation is determination, differentiation for intelligibility, then the two are completely interpenetrating. So I don't know if you could make an argument, but what I'm saying is you can say, but we can at least explain why do we see the history of reflection on this consistently moving towards this kind of conclusion. So that's one. And then given that notion of convergence, I wonder what you think about, and here I want to tread very carefully because I'm not trying to besmirch the originality of the Trinity, but I see very convergent notions from very independent, coming out of a Buddhist Asiatic cultural historical framework, where you get to notions in certain parts, certain forms of Buddhism, Indra's net, you get certain notions in Zen that also seem to be coming to something like this. Now, I'm not being a Huxleyan perennialist. I'm not saying they're saying the same thing, but it's almost like the movement of, and I want to use the word Geist to mean both reflection and experience, like Hegel would use it. Okay, it's almost like the movement of Geist moves towards this in some fashion as it's unfolding itself historically, and the fact that you get, and I can point to other examples, right, of this. And you can even see it mythopoetically. You can see there's this weird movement where there's syncretism and people are trying to bring the gods together, right? And right, Amun Ra, right? But you also see the ones where they're trying to, differentiate the gods out, right? All the generations of the god. Like, again, I'm trying to tread very carefully here, David. I'm trying to trespass on the fact that what you said is right. This is, I'll use your language, a revelation to Christianity. But it seems to me you can make a good case that there seems to be something sort of inherent in the unfolding of Geist that leads to this.
Oh, absolutely. I know. And I don't want to let me just begin by affirming everything you just said. I think that's absolutely crucial. I mean, that there's a glimmer of this absolutely everywhere. The main point, I mean, the relationship between Christianity and other religions is a big, huge question. And my main point is that let me actually I can actually in a way generalize it, that this insight always comes as a revelation.
Yeah.
So I mean, even because there's a non-reducibility to it. When one sees it, one sees it as a kind of a surprise. That was the main point that I wanted to make. Now, one can then ask about the sort of historical emergence of it, and that becomes a different question. But the main point is that this coincidence. It's the very nature of this coincidence that it has to be recognized as preceding one's reasoning. Now, preceding not in the sense of just a flat a priori assumption, or in the sense of something that has no intelligibility. One sees this in Plato all over the place. I mean, Plotinus speaks about. I mean, what's so interesting about Plotinus is there's such a rigorous thinking through. I mean, every detail, there's a rigorous thinking through. But he also, apparently there were Porphyry relates. There was something like four moments where he actually saw it.
He realized Kenosis, and he was realized by Kenosis. Yes,
that's right. Exactly. So
by the way, Kenosis means oneness, but not the oneness of the number one. That's what Plotinus was on it. One-ing.
One-ing. Sort of as a verb almost. So that was my main point. There's something about the kind of the paradox that is essentially revelatory.
Okay, so then I want to say something about that. Then, first of all, I would say that sort of ultimately makes sense for me. I think I used ultimately correct there, because I think there always needs to be a moment of insight that formulates a problem before any inference can run. And I think that's well established. And my work on relevance realization points to that. And secondly, we see cognition is also, and I've made this argument extensively, and both of you, I think, have seen it, that the grammar of our cognition is inherently this bottom-up, top-down, completely interpenetrating. We are inherently dialogical in nature, et cetera, et cetera. And so our cognition, right, insofar as we are not solipsists or skeptics, the fact that all of our cognition seems to converge on this as its way of trying to track reality. And so, while of course we can be wildly mistaken about the content, there seems to be something fundamentally revelatory about the very nature of our cognition, our making sense of things, both the relationship between insight and inference, and the grammar of emanation and emergence within cognition that is revealing something fundamental about being. But my argument about that is, if it doesn't, we're in a lot of trouble. And so I don't have an argument for that. My argument is all argument presupposes that. And therefore, would that sit well with the notion of it being a revelation?
Just to add one note, one of the things that we're sort of gesturing towards here is this notion of a radical reciprocity.
Yes.
interdependence, and it's the very nature of an interdependence that you can't start with one thing and then add
Exactly.
or then and then deny that and start with the other and then add the one thing. There's somehow it's the very nature of this interdependence that it emerges as an event. There's a kind of event like, and again, revelation. One sees this in Heraclitus very clearly. I think he had found insight into that kind of.
Well, and Parmenides too. He has the vision.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. You're right. Absolutely.
Right. So I mean, the person who in the post-Enlightenment, I mean the historical period, not the Buddhist notion, who really got this, interpenetration. I mean, I think Hegel is the maestro of trying to make us understand this. I think that's a fair thing to say. So now I want to return to what we put the pin in, which is the argument and we touched on it also at the end of the last one about, what you said about, Hegel seems to be onto something, but he doesn't fully get it. And there's a critique here. And I wanted you to come back and have you flesh that out and put it into relationship to Hegel's notion of the Trinity and what we're talking about right now.
Right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think, Hegel pointed to Jakob Böhme as having, as being one of the great moments in German thought for recognizing that the mystery of God is at the heart of every other mystery, and understanding that it's the nature of God and
hang on, Dave. Just for the audience, Böhme is usually regarded as a mystic, a German mystic. He comes up and influences many different people in very interesting ways. He's not easy to read. Right? He's quite cryptic in lots of ways. But just for everybody knows, by the way, this also goes towards David's point about something like a revelation driving things in a powerful way.
No, thank you, John. And I should say I'm not necessarily recommending that people read Böhme. he is very strange. But what's remarkable is that the great German, classical German thinkers, Schelling, Hegel, they pointed to Böhme as. I think Hegel said somewhere, if he was the only person that ever wrote anything in Germany would have fulfilled its role in world history as making a contribution. He gives this obscure figure such an extraordinary role. But what Hegel does is, he says, okay, but the one thing that Böhme missed is that it's not just an image of God. Like all of reality is not just an image of God; it's an image of the Trinitarian God. So he adds the Trinitarian notion as the decisive thing. And that's, so when I said that, he recognized the philosophical implications of this religious mystery. I mean, that's I think that can be demonstrated pretty clearly in his thought, the role that this plays, even though some interpretations of Hegel really marginalize it. But for him, it's that there is no that thought. I mean, it's the various things, John, that you laid out earlier. All these things are fundamentally relational, and if you attempt to pull something out and absolutize it, you're going to falsify the whole. So whenever we try to understand any particular thing, we understand it in its relation to other things, and ultimately in its relation to everything.
Yes.
And that means for Hegel now that we have to see it as part of a larger process, you might say.
Historical cultural process.
So this is one of his ideas, that truth is always, it's a result. And it's kind of interesting. It's not, for him, the important thing isn't only to have an insight. You need to also affirm the whole process that got you to that insight.
Yes, of course. I didn't need to not say that. Yeah. Go ahead.
And if you do that, you actually appreciate the insight much better. I mean,
there's a more than appreciation. When you say, Hegel even talks about an appropriation of the insight, appreciation and appropriation.
Yeah, I sometimes use an example with students. I say, imagine a child, a young person, a teenager, that is told that all of life is suffering, that life is suffering, you know. There's a sense of course, everybody understands that. Those words are simple and any child can understand that. But imagine the same child now at the end of his life at 90 years old.
Yes, yeah.
Who says life is suffering, you know, and there's the words, every single dimension of that just means something infinitely more. It has a weight and a substance that for Hegel, that's the thing. Things have to be worked out in all of their you know, for him it would be the sort of historical movement be filled out. You don't know what an animal is until or you don't know what an idea is until you've thought through all of its implications and then come back to affirm the idea. So everything. Now, what I would say, and I'm going on a little too long here, but what I would say that for me, this actually connects to the earlier point. I think Hegel has an extraordinary insight there, and I have learned a lot from pondering these things. But there's also something about I like to contrast Hegel on this point with this French poet, Charles Péguy, P-E-G-U-Y, who's one of my all-time favorites, who says everything is at the beginning. You know, Hegel says everything is at the end. Péguy says, in a way, everything is at the beginning, that childhood, there's a kind of a fullness and wealth in the beginning. And I want to say that they're both right.
Yeah.
And if you simply affirm one without the other, you're going to run into difficulty.
Well, you're losing the relationality, actually.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so a few things come out for me. One is, and I'm going to say something, put something out there, but I'd like to then give Ken a chance to how this is landing, what's happening for him. One is, and this is something that I've been having a hard time. I've been really enjoying Brandom and Pichard and the person who wrote Hegel's Theory of Intelligibility, but the mystical seems to be the relationship between the mystical and the rational that's so pronounced in Plato and especially in Plotinus. I'm not seeing it in this reinterpretation, and I understand part of the reason. I don't think there's a justification. This is just an explanation. Yeah. They're so keen to present Hegel as providing a naturalistic account of the normativity of rationality. They want to shy away from the mystical, but I think you're right, and I'm getting increasing number of sources that would back you up that the mystical plays, meaning a relation to the mystery, plays a profound role in Hegel, yet it's hard to see it being articulated. And then secondly, just on that point, one of the things in the Neoplatonic tradition that's unlike the Cartesian tradition, and we can argue about whether or not Hegel's still in that tradition or not, is the mystical says there are truths that are only disclosed to you in transformation, that truth is inherently, ultimately transformational in nature. And this, of course, gets us into wonder and mystery that you see in Plato and Plotinus. Again, you're the Hegel scholar. I'm just the student learning. So I'm concerned about giving you space to talk more about that relation. And then second, I want to push back, not against you, but to try and push you more into, I can see people like Brandon and others speaking on behalf of Hegel saying, everything you just said is right, David. And you know what that all grounds out in? It grounds out in the fact that reciprocity is that human beings are inherent. Human beings as persons, not as animals, but as Geistlich, are inherently reciprocally recognizing. We're inherently reciprocal relational beings, and the I that is we, that is I, as we talked about last time, and that's what grounds all of this. It grounds out in that, and nothing more is needed to ground it. And I have a sense, especially what you said about the beginning and the end just now, that you want to say, no, there's more. And I want you to tie what you just said to that. But maybe, like I said, we could first give Ken a chance to say something.
Well, I'll try to ground us a little bit out of the abstract, just to reflect how this is laying out for me. When I was young, I grew up in this sort of fundamentalist Anabaptist milieu of Christianity, and God was very much an other over there, and it was very much a substance type nominalist that you were talking about at the beginning. And I always, and even still when I'm in that frame, because it's, it's sort of my native tongue, so it's easy for me to lapse into that. My experience of myself is an agent over and against the world, versus inherently related to what is already there. But of course, my actual experience of myself is like when you're using this word revelation, like that, to me, that feels like the most true way of talking about what it's like to be a person. It is a continual revelation of being. Like, I don't understand where I came from. I don't understand why it is that I have the personality I do or act the way I do. There's a sort of inherent revelatory experience, certainly of profound things when I engage with deep thinkers and deep practices, but even of the mundane, even of the most, last night I was playing with my daughter and tickling her, and she was laughing, and we were just having this wonderful experience. And like, there was such, I was thinking about this eternal surprise of aspect of the Holy Spirit, of the Trinity, because I was thinking about this conversation, and like there's something about that experience of playing with my child and her and I connecting in this loving surprise, though. There's something about tickling your child where she's always sort of surprised by it and just taken into this joy almost. And like that sense of revelatory relational connection, that's what's really, really landing and profound for me here.
Well, could I respond to that and then
Please.
Also feed that back to David, which is, to me, I mean, in the Platonic sense, and this is also on my mind because of David and the talk I just gave at Stoicon. I mean, that's an experience of beauty properly understood, right? Where appearances are not deceptive, they're disclosing of a deeper reality. But beauty has this really interesting property. It's novelty that is immediately intelligible, or at least immediately affords us gaining intelligibility. It's an insight that's not horrific and world-shattering. It's an insight that makes us grow and affords us growing our world.
That's right.
And so
that's great. I mean, thank you both, but thank you, Ken. That I think gets to the heart of something. And be interesting. What would Hegel make of what you just said? To connect some of these themes. I mean, I think we're really getting to something core here. To connect some of these things with some of the language we've been using. Revelation has a kind of a surprise character to it. It's not simply the result of a deduction. It's something that you encounter that in a way encounters you. There's a certain priority of the other. It shows itself to you in a way that John, you mentioned being transformed. You have to then adapt yourself to it, rather than simply adapting it to you. But then the other term is appropriation that you mentioned, John, which is really helpful here. That you internalize it. It's not dumb surprise, like you're hit over the head with a 2x4. You're surprised by something that wants you to take it in and want you to enjoy it. And now here's where it seems to me one of the most interesting ways of understanding what Hegel is about. For Hegel, the revelation, the mystery, the whole purpose of it is appropriation. So there's no point in a revelation that isn't appropriated. And you can think of Hegel as having this extraordinary sort of voracious intellectual appetite. There's no mystery that is not meant to be appropriated, because otherwise it's just sort of stupid gaping at something. And so but it seems to me this is where you see the danger of Hegel. In the end, he wants there to be no mystery left. For Hegel to say that there's somehow a mystery remains ultimate is to say that you're abandoning the nature of reason. To say that mystery can be ultimate, you're saying that reason is a sort of a secondary feature of it's a denial of Geist, ultimately, that the whole point of mystery is to be appropriated, and the way we appropriate mystery is by reasoning it. So this is why Hegel says, in the end, God is mysterious when he reveals himself, but in the end, we're meant to ideally exhaust the mystery in our appropriation of it. And when he says that philosophy begins as love of wisdom, but in the end, it's meant to be just wisdom and not love of, because love implies that you haven't completed it yet. And it seems to me that that's very different from Plato, who recognizes that abiding in and with a mystery is part of the very nature of reason. And in Plato, you have a much more generous affirmation, both of the continual surprise, wonder, and it's a wonder that's not, as you said, John, it's intelligible. It's always intelligible, but that doesn't mean exhaustible through our reasoning in a way that would then finally bring it to a close.
So let me pick up on that, because I can hear some people replying, but I'm going to reply on your behalf in order to ask a question, which is, oh no, but Hegel doesn't think we'll ever reach that, or blah blah blah, and Brandom seems to indicate. But what you're saying is no. Hegel thinks in principle. It's only for reason. Right. But I'm going to use that language because ideally lands weirdly for people. Sure. Right. So in principle, right, it's exhaustible. It's just in practicality and our finitude, right? Blah, blah, blah. But you're saying when Plato is saying in principle, the mystery is inexhaustible. And of course, and this converges with a lot, again, like I think of Polanyi and, Esther, like at Meek on Contact with Reality, that our primary mark of realness is inexhaustible intelligibility. We get a sense of intelligibility, but we get a sense that from which intelligibility is emerging is properly mysterious to us because it is in principle exhaustible. If we can exhaust something, that's typically we realize, oh, this is a dream. Oh, this is a dream. Right. This is not a profound work of art. That's all. That's it. Well, that's not a very great work of art, right? Or beauty, right? Scari in her book on beauty and how it prepares us for justice and truth, by the way, is like, I didn't realize trees could be like that. And that revelation of the beauty of the tree, it doesn't destroy all the previous trees. It gathers them all together. Here's the oneing, but that says, but here's the new, right? Here, right? And you realize, that's probably always going to be the case, that trees have a way of surprising me forever and ever and ever. And that's something about reality. So first of all, I hear that's what you're saying. And then I'm wondering, I know that Hegel's aware of these arguments, like, because, Plotinus seems to be making that argument about the inexhaustibleness of the one. And secondly, the argument that the source, and by the word source or ground are both inherently relational terms, don't think of them as things, right? That the source of intelligibility is not itself directly intelligible, right?
See, I think that's the point that Hegel would just say no to. My sense is, so this is why, if you take, for granted a basic assumption, I think he makes an incredibly compelling case. So when I say this, I don't mean to be dismissive of Hegel. I think there's extraordinary, I consider him one of the greatest philosophers of all time. I have deep respect. So I don't mean this, in a short conversation to go immediately to a problem.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're dismissing the person.
I share that with you. I share that with
Yeah,
you. He's one of the greats.
I don't know that Hegel would, and so I mean, it's Hegel in the end is an Aristotelian more than a Platonist.
Yes, yes.
And when Aristotle articulates his notion of God, he wants to say God is pure actuality, and that means the highest kind of actuality. What's the highest kind of activity? It's thinking. And so, but thinking about what's best, and we just said what's best is thinking. So it's thinking upon thinking, that includes all possible thoughts and so forth. But it's interesting that Plotinus, centuries later, in his appropriation of the philosophical tradition, he says, well, Plato actually has a deeper insight into than Aristotle into the nature of God, because for Aristotle, thought thinking itself, that's a unified multiplicity, a perfectly unified multiplicity. One in unity and difference are perfectly unified, but that presupposes a principle that enables it. That is,
yes, exactly.
Totally. So yeah, and as you said, that the source of intelligibility is not itself intelligible in the same way as the things that it makes intelligible, right? That's the insight that you don't have in Aristotle, it seems to me. And then eventually in Hegel, very, very profound thinkers. But that's and you can see for Hegel, he says he turns Plato against himself. He says, well, Plato says that God is good and is jealous, and is not jealous, therefore wants to share his goodness. But Hegel says, well, this means that if God reserves any mystery for himself that he is not making known and offering for appropriation, it means that God is not generous.
Yeah.
So for Hegel, the perfect ideal intelligibility of God coincides with generosity. Right. And it seems to me from this the Christian Neoplatonic tradition, you would want to say, no, it's more paradoxical. Perfect generosity, when God gives himself away totally, he doesn't become less himself. He remains radically transcendent, and that's and so that total kenosis and self-offering to appropriation and the absolute mystery of the inner life of God, those things coincide. And there you have the difference, I think.
I've got a book that I'm going to be reading based on an essay by Maso Abi coming out of the Zen tradition about kenosis and the self-emptying of God, and the dialogue between Christian philosophers and Abe around exactly that notion.
My father was a really big fan of his. He read all his works. I remember years ago. Yeah.
So I want to ask something here, because I want to see if I'm hearing you right. Something I often hear when I'm talking to people just in life and about the future, these sorts of things. They say, well, God has a plan. God knows what's going to happen. That sort of idea, right? That the end is already known in history. And I started to think more about that and sort of wonder about that, and I'm wondering if this is a little bit of what you're saying here, is that God is in some sense, there's a mystery within God, even for God. And that when we think of God knowing all things and having a plan and knowing the end, and like we're sort of doing this Hegelian thing and maybe this nominalist thing where we're setting God as, we're setting this fixed system that we're sort of like exploring or something, versus like, is God mysterious to himself and ever unfolding to himself even?
Yeah.
So you just turned into Whitehead, by the way, Ken, which is very interesting to watch, because Whitehead's answer to that is yes. To your question, God is properly, ultimately mysterious to God, because God is not an artificer. He's not a assembler of things. Like when we plan on a building and make a building, God is intrinsically, inherently a participant in creativity. And so for Whitehead, the creativity is the ultimate reality, and creativity, like we've been saying, has to have genuine novelty in it, or it just becomes deduction. It just becomes the explication of implication. And so Whitehead would answer that. And that's part of what, so Whitehead talks about, and you have to be really careful about this. And I'm not saying Whitehead is by any means a classical theist. He called himself a panentheist. And I understand why, there's been this weird appreciation but distancing between Christian orthodoxy and Whitehead. But, Whitehead talks about God being a fellow sufferer with us, in the sense that God is also undergoing the mystery of creativity as much as we are, because God can't remove creativity, deeply metaphysical creativity, from the equation, or he would actually cease to be God. And so he would give that answer to your question. I tend to like that answer, but I want to hear what David thinks of that answer to the question.
Actually, to sort of comment that sort of from the back door, I want to first connect that the last thing that I was talking about with Ken's experiential exposition of tickling his daughter and having her laugh, and it seems to me that very concretely that gets us to the heart of the matter. So the question is, how much of that do we understand? Can we understand that that joy and this your daughter's revelation of herself to you and her laughter? Do we understand that? And I would want to say yes, and think about it. There are two ways of interpreting understanding. Does understanding mean appropriating it entirely into our concepts, so that once I've got the concepts, I really don't need to pay much attention to my daughter anymore, because I've kind of got the essence of her? So the problem is, then we might react to that and say, no, it's not about understanding, it's just about loving. And I think that's also problematic, because we're conceding that love has a certain irrational character. It's not about, and I would want to say, no, there's something in appreciating the abiding mystery of your daughter. That itself is possibly the deepest form of an understanding.
Good.
It's simultaneously understanding and loving, so that the very act of understanding includes an affirmation of the abiding mystery. And there you see you're rejecting this opposition. It's either mysterious or we understand it.
Right.
To me, wonder and knowledge ultimately are identical and convertible, and that's a whole other argument we could make. Okay, but the way that then that connects with this point about Whitehead, so that Whitehead was deeply appropriated this notion in Hegel. But there's the danger and the extent to which Whitehead is incredibly complex and insightful. And again, one needs to be qualified. But it seems to me that the danger there is that one concede a kind of an opposition between transcendence and immanence.
I see. Yeah.
So you say, in order for God to suffer with us, we have to deny God. We have to in a way exhaust God's being in the process of being with us.
Right.
And it seems to me this is where someone like Dionysius the Areopagite. I mean, for me, he's always the authority on this kind of question. For him, the radical transcendence of God as perfect in himself coincides with a perfect immanence in creation and so forth, so that one affirms both. And that's why the fathers of the church would always say, the mystery of the cross is that the immutable one has suffered. In Latin, they say the impassus est, or something like that. That the one who cannot suffer suffers, and they mean both of those. They don't mean, when they say the one who cannot suffer stops that part of himself and now is suffering, so it's a denial. No, it's both. Somehow you've got transcendence and immanence, you have mystery and knowledge, you have perfection and change, you have movement and rest, you have all these things all at once.
So I agree with all that. I'll speak on behalf, and I think I misrepresented Whitehead, because Whitehead, I'll use his term and then I'll immediately change it because it will land. He talks about the bipolar nature of God, and I don't want to use that term because that's not a psychological term. So most Whiteheadians, I'm not saying we're Whiteheadian, but most Whiteheadians say the dipolar. So God is both the absolute sufferer and that which is absolutely transcendent to the suffering at the same time. And I think he's trying to articulate that. Now, whether or not he does that completely successfully, I think is something I myself am questioning. But I just wanted to wanted to be clear that I think Whitehead is concerned with that, and he's very clear about the dipolar nature. But he doesn't want. But he's very clear that the dipolar doesn't mean bifurcated. He goes on and on about that in certain ways.
That's very helpful. And I have to say, I have not studied Whitehead. Again, my father was very interested in Whitehead in his sort of early years. But Whiteheadians, as always, you know, Hegelians are not Hegel, Nietzscheans are not Nietzsche, Whiteheadians are not Whitehead. Process, if you think of God simply as process, but of course he's a far more subtle thinker.
Yeah, Filler,
I want to connect.
Filler has some significant criticisms of Whitehead, by the way.
Okay, yeah, I should. It's to my shame that I've not studied Whitehead. I need to look into.
I would recommend reading the Filler book first, actually.
Okay, yeah, no, I've noted down. I was unfamiliar with that. I'm very happy to know about it.
David, can I ask you?
I also want to know about Heidegger too.
Okay, well, he argues that for all of his villainization of Plato, Heidegger is actually turning back towards the Neoplatonic tradition in the understanding of being, but he can't quite get there because of the way he's created this very simple narrative around Plato as being the father of substantial metaphysics and the history of nihilism. David, I wanted to ask you a question. Now, it seems to me that there seems to be a difference between what we're saying and Hegel's saying in some sense. And this is not meant to capture it all. This is to try and pick up on one thread and see if we could talk about it. It seems to me, and please note that language, Brandom and other people, yourself, you're much better scholars of Hegel than I am. I'm still deeply studying it with the help of my good friend Dan Chiappi, who is a very excellent companion along any philosophical journey. But it seems like ultimately in Hegel, you get something like, and you might see this in even as far back as Parmenides, is that intelligibility is ultimately identical with conceptuality. That to be intelligible is to be captured by concepts, conceptuality. Conceptual structures and intelligibility structures are ultimately one. And the reason I say that is because that seems to me to be the fundamental claim of idealism. As I don't mean Berkeleyan idealism, I mean German idealism, is that there's an identity between the intelligible, that there's an identity relationship between conceptuality and intelligibility. And while I think there's something important being said there, I take it that you think, and I think Filler is arguing as well, that isn't ultimately the case. That there's ways in which intelligibility exceeds conceptuality, specifically in the way that you've made the argument that there's a proper part of mystery within intelligibility that isn't captured by conceptuality by the very definition of mystery. Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, that's and that actually connects to a point that Ken made that I want to come back to in just a second. But right, for Hegel, the concept in a way is ultimate. Now he insists on striking a difference between a speculative concept and the concepts of understanding, and that gets into technical stuff that's very interesting and would be very relevant, but it would take too long to work out and too technical. But at the heart of it is this sense of appropriation. I mean, it comes back to that. At the German word for concept, it's very interesting. It's actually in the Latin too, but we English speakers tend not to hear the Latin etymologies. But begreifen means to grasp, and you use the word capture. I mean, that's in the conceptus, a kind of a grasping. And one of the things that's interesting in the classical tradition, one makes a distinction between intellectus and ratio. Understanding and reasoning, and the priority was always given to intellectus, which is this sort of seeing the truth of something, and ratio is the reasoning, the discursive, conceptual arriving at it. And the classical
that maps onto the Greek Noesis and Dianoia.
Exactly. Yeah. So and in the classical tradition, intellectus had a priority over ratio. That you begin with an insight and you reason your way to a deeper insight, but insight means like beholding the truth. And for Hegel, he reverses that. He actually makes Vernunft and Verstand, the German words. Vernunft is ratio and Verstand is intellectus, and he makes Vernunft, ratio, reasoning, higher than intellect.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
No, so he reverses it, and that coincides with this idea that we're trying to get all of the revelation of reality, you might say, into the concept, and that might never happen, but that's what we're aiming at, is an ultimate conceptual grasp, an appropriation of truth. And what that denies is that, what that loses is this understanding of understanding, which is precisely a beholding of the other as an act of understanding. So that's not just preliminary and the starting point for grasping the truth, but it's also where you end up with this contemplative beholding. And to connect back, this is with your daughter, you're understanding her when she's disclosing herself to you. That's and there's a kind of an ultimacy to that. That's not just kicking off to a conceptual grasp. But this then goes all the way back into God. Like this is one of the most radical questions I think that one can ask. Is God a mystery to himself? And one has to be very careful how one answers that question, because as John mentioned in the beginning, it's so easy to go off into heretical misunderstandings and so forth. And I'm not always as cautious as I ought to be. But it seems to me that if you recognize that mystery and knowledge are coincident and convertible, that mystery is not just imperfect knowing, but represents a kind of perfection of knowing, then it does make sense to say that God is a mystery to himself, as long as you recognize that in itself is a mysterious, coincides mysteriously with God as being perfectly transparent to himself. So God knows himself perfectly and is a mystery to himself, because knowledge, because what it means to know is to behold the other. And if you were to deny that, this beholding of the other, you would deny the Trinitarian nature of God, and you would, would lead to all these things we've been discussing.
So let me respond to that, because and now I'm not being Whitehead, although he's Whitehead's right here. So the way I try to understand this, and I mean it as a metaphor, perhaps it's an analogy in the Thomistic sense. So again, I'm a creator, we're creators, and there's ways in which I'm a creator as an artifact, even with arguments. I put pieces together, I drive out and right. But I'm also a poet. I write poetry, poesis, which is not the same thing. Now, the interesting thing in Greek is that word can cover both, which is really interesting. But when you're writing poetry, well, first of all, you have to write a lot of bad poetry you have to read a lot of poetry, and you have to write a lot of bad poetry about 15, 20 years before you start to write. I mean, there are geniuses, perhaps, maybe Rilke or something. But for me, you don't start writing poetry until you have to write out a lot of stuff that's just crap. But once you get to that place where you get something like a flow experience, you get this weird thing, and maybe it ascends towards this paradox. Stuff comes out of me when I'm writing a poem that I'm not expecting, but I don't feel that means that I was demonically possessed, or that it was other than me that made it, but it was me beyond me that yet is still me. That sort of dialogical nature of this, the self-transcending self, that is exactly the place where poetry comes from. And that I take to be a better metaphor for what we're talking about here than our notion of making things the way we do artifact production. I wonder if that's helpful, because it strikes me that the moment of beholding is a making sense, but in the poesis sense, not in the artifacting sense.
That's right. That's right. And we tend to use the more banal metaphors as analogies to understand God rather than the best ones. And now think of what you just said, the poesis, you write a word. One of the ways of conceiving the Trinity, the classical terms is the procession of the word from the original source. Now think of that procession of the word. You can think of it as, I'm simply saying something that I have already conceived. I'm just I'm trying to, I've got a concept in my mind that's complete, and now I'm just saying words that match it, that try to match it, as opposed to, I mean, the thing is, nobody really thinks that way. All of us, when I speak.
Well, I do when I'm making a shopping list.
Okay, right. There you go. Right. Again, so it's interesting. So that's then what we tend to take as the model, and then we know. But think about, I mean, like right now, I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it.
Yes.
I mean, in a certain sense, the words are coming, but that doesn't mean that I'm saying them unintelligible. My knowing and my saying are simultaneous, and that would be like in a poem. The words come out, and you realize, yes, that's what I wanted to say, but I didn't know that somehow beforehand. So that there's simultaneously if you think of an ideal case, you could say, I perfectly understand what I'm saying, but it also is I'm discovering it.
Yep.
As I'm producing it. And think about the generation of the procession of the word in God along those lines as a poetic act.
Yes.
There you can see what it would mean to say intelligibility and surprise coincide. Yeah.
So it sounds like that is a better metaphor. So I have one last question, and then we should start wrapping it up. I need to, at least. I think this has been truly poetic in the way we just described, and that for me is a defining feature of dialogos as opposed to mere dialogue or discussion. To bring it all the way back into the first talk. And I'm going to make a simple sentence that is, by its simplicity, intended to be tremendously provocative and be right. What's the relationship between God and Hegel's Geist? Not for Hegel, because he treats them as identical, but we've disidentified them, to my mind. And so now we can then, I think, formulate the question: what is the relationship? Let's take it that there is something like Geist, that Hegel's not just whistling in the wind. He's tapped into something real, maybe profoundly real. Then it behooves us to raise the question: what's if we've disidentified Geist from God, and yet we acknowledge the deep reality of Geist, the question comes up about what's the relationship? What is and especially because of relationality being primary, what is the relationship between God and Geist? So I think that's a fair question. Do you acknowledge that's a fair question?
Yeah, I'll let Ken take this one.
Well, it's actually sort of interesting, because the thing that comes to mind there, I don't know if either of you are very familiar with the tradition of Sophiology from Bulgakov,
yes, I am.
Solyov.
I know of it, but I haven't studied it. But.
Okay,
I've read some of it. I don't consider myself, anything. I am an interested novice, but I have read some of it.
Okay, yeah, I'm briefly into it, but I read a book called Sophia, the Hidden Christ of Thomas Merton, by Christopher Pramuk. He's a Catholic theologian and philosopher, and I found it very, very compelling. Is sort of this, and this is what comes up for me in response to this question, John, is that Geist has this really interesting relationship with I'm going to use language that's my language, and I'm not a professional philosopher, so it's going to be messy probably, but this pattern of Christ that is the sort of the part of God that is suffering with us, in that sort of Whiteheadian sense. That pole maybe it has echoes with Sophia, and that's where Geist might fit in relation to God.
That's actually a wonderful proposal, that Sophia, which has this really interesting status even in the Hebrew Bible, and it's something other than an angel, and even angels have weird, because they have weird identity, non-identity relationships with God.
Yeah.
That's wow. I just love that proposal. I think that's a very interesting proposal, and it's interesting that the one of the most holy churches in the Byzantine Empire was the Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, right? And so, wow, Ken, that's really. Sorry, I don't have any deep argument, but as a response, it's like, I think that's insightful. I think that's a really insightful proposal.
Yeah. Yeah, and then to think of the connection, I mean, in the the Byzantine tradition, and also in a way also in the Catholic tradition, that connecting wisdom in a certain sense with Christ, in a certain sense with Mary, the feminine dimension, and there's also a fascinating historical connection between the Holy Spirit and Mary.
And this is one of the primary ideas. That's one of the primary ideas in the tradition, is that Mary is sort of the primary manifestation of Sophia in a person, but it becomes sort of Mary becomes sort of an icon that we can look through, to behold this sort of feminine receptivity aspect of God. That is loving. That's
Sophia
loving up toward God.
Right.
Sorry,
can I interrupt it? I just wanted to. I was just exclaiming because. Go ahead. Looking up to God, is that?
This notion that there's something above and there's something below, and the below is moving up, right? The emergence that's moving into the oneness is.
But Mary also represents the perfect receptivity of God's Spirit too, right? There's also a receptivity there. I shouldn't be. I'm not a Catholic, but I'm just. That's how I see it from the outside.
No, there'd be that opens up a whole. You ended with one of the greatest mysteries here that would open up a whole other conversation. Maybe that's something we can.
We can do that next. I like that. It would be something like this talk. So first of all, I think that's a fantastic proposal as an answer to my question, and I think you're right. I think it has. I think it clearly has biblical overtones. I think it clearly has convergence with things from other religious and philosophical traditions. Obviously, Catholic traditions around Mary. The Church also has that. Some of those features too. And so maybe it could be something like, if we understand Geist as holy wisdom, or Sophia to even do it, then we could ask about what's the relationship between Sophia and God, and we could unpack that, and that's where Hegel got us. So this is Ken's channel, so I'll stop talking. I need to go soon because I realize I'm going to lose power, and I got I'll just going to go get my power cord while you talk. Okay, so I can hear you, by the way, so keep talking.
I just to pick up on that as a final just thought about in response to John's question, Geist and God. It's interesting. A philosopher whom I have a great love and affection and respect for, William Desmond, who is a fascinating reader of Hegel, has a book, Hegel's God, and then a question mark, a counterfeit double, that he interprets Hegel as in a way thinking through Geist precisely as a sort of substitute. Now, there's something to that. I think that it's also the case that Hegel brings out a truth of the revelation of the Trinity that has not sufficiently been appropriated, to use that language again, and recognize that there is something about the movement of history. We tend to think of that as a purely secular matter and not having a theological dimension, but it's a very one of the things that I think we most need as Western civilization is to recover a genuine philosophy and theology of history. I think we've lost a sense of history having a meaning. And one of the reasons we lost it is that, Hegel gave it a kind of pat meaning that then people react to. And that's obviously to be avoided, but we, as they say, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's something that is essential in that notion that history has a meaning, and the meaning that history has something to do with the Trinitarian processions, and the inner nature of God and so forth. Something of that has to be held on to.
So I have the Desmond book. So you do recommend it, David? Do you think it's a good book?
He kind of turned to get more against Hegel towards the end. I mean, he was always in this. He's such a profound thinker and really a remarkable person. Ken, you should look into getting him on one of your programs.
I'd love to read that book and talk with him.
Yeah, John, you should. Yeah, you should too. He's very. I mean, he's the kind of person that he doesn't speak without illumination. I mean, very just a profound man. But he became quite negative about Hegel's influence towards the end, and that you find that in the book. Some of his earlier work was less immediately critical. But his thoughts about Hegel are very complex. I don't want to mischaracterize any of it.
But it sounds like it's a good foil, the book, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you both. This is just some profound exploration of relationality here. So thank you. Any final words?
An enactment of it. That's what a good conversation. There's a certain insight. There's certain joy. And I have to say that's when we have these meetings, even though they are mediated by a screen and technology, and that's not an insignificant point. I have to say I always come away from these things just feeling lighter, feeling joy, and that's a sign of something real. I take those kinds of things very seriously. So thank you both for the conversation.
Well, I want to thank you, both of you. I'd like to pick up on what I call the three apps: appreciation, appropriation, and apprehension. A little bit when we do our next discussion, because I think these aspects of sense making have not been properly appreciated or appropriated or apprehended. So and if we could also bring that into the discussion next time, I'd be really happy about it. But Ken, reach out to Chris, and we'll set another one of these up. We'll come back to my channel for the next one.
All right.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it. Thank you, gentlemen.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Genuine Dialogos.
Yeah.